Welcome to the Every Brain is Different podcast. We're here with Tucker Miller, and Tucker is the CEO of Onward Leadership, is an executive coach, speaker, and author with over 35 years of experience in law, human resources, and corporate leadership. Known for her book, The First Four Words, Tucker helps leaders transform conversations to drive connection and impact. You can learn more about her at onwardleadership.com and jtuckermiller.com. Welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you very much. And I bet people are wondering, why are you bringing a leadership person into this conversation? But we'll get into that. I
Yeah,
think that'll
for
be
sure.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're involved in the neurodivergent community?
I have a lot of colleagues. Actually, it's surprising how many, you probably know this, how many adults discover this or learn, usually as they're supporting their kids. And then, oh, by the way, I think that'll be a familiar piece. So that definitely is a part of many of my colleagues' experience. And I have a growing number of kids around me and neighbors who are asking for help as they're navigating the school district. So while I don't directly have neurodivergent, I have raised high risk, high anxiety, high needs kids. And I think increasingly that seems to be more the norm than not these days.
Yeah, it's definitely diagnoses are increasing, and I think there is a lot of debate about that. I think it's just we're getting better at diagnosing, and so people have always been around. Like I was talking to somebody the other day, and
Mhm.
he's like in his 70s, and he said, back in my day, nobody was autistic and nobody had ADHD. And I'm like, not true. I can
Yeah.
guarantee you that's not true.
We just don't
But
talk
Yeah.
about it as much. Like with all
yeah.
the access, people can share their experience and be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm the same way."
That's right.
If that person has a diagnosis, maybe I have that. And they look into it. So
Even if there had been more diagnoses back in the day, there weren't as many helping professionals and solutions and research. So we would have had yet another label with nowhere to go with it. So I can understand it, but that's the beauty of where we're at right now. Certainly, there's plenty of things that make people anxious, and all of that is another layer to it. But the insights that we're all benefiting from through this research and work and discussion, I think is really powerful. I think my background is in law, and I remember when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, and people thought, oh, that's the thing to help people with disabilities, people in wheelchairs. But as a young mother with a stroller or a toddler or whatever it was, I was like, ramps, they're amazing. Elevators, thank you. And you start to notice that when we learn how to help one group, we usually all end up benefiting. And that was why I was so excited to talk with your audience today.
Yeah, and we were talking to Bryson Tarbett, who is the music teacher. Is that what he is? Anyway, he was talking about inclusion in the classroom and how in his classroom, when he was a teacher, he just laid out all the accommodations, like not the accommodations, but the sensory equipment that you could use, like headphones or fidget toys or anything like that. He just had them on a back table in his classroom and anyone could go get it. And so it took away the stigma of, oh, you have
Right.
ADHD, so you need a fidget toy. Or you have autism and you need it quieter in the classroom, so you need the headphones. Like the majority of the kids that you don't use those things were neurodivergent, but it took away the stigma of they're only for people who are neurodivergent.
And there's also all kinds of different learning styles and just ways that we take in information. I've been doing workplace training for many years, as you indicated in the intro. And there was a point in time where if people requested it, we could show videos with closed captioning. If they requested it, we would do it. And so there was this call out, does anyone need an accommodation? And then we'll do that. And I remember having this tense conversation where I said, we stopped doing that because the stigma makes it even hard to ask for what you want. And the interesting thing was, I started to notice, even in our own home and with my kids who have great hearing, we started to prefer closed captioning all the time anyway. In fact, as soon as I discovered that, I wanted to go back and watch Downton Abbey all over again because I'd missed so much the first time.
Yeah, yeah. I use closed captioning all the time, and I am not deaf. I have fine hearing, so
Yes,
it's fine.
it's powerful.
Yeah, but that's what we're here to talk about with you today is having those tense conversations, maybe conversations that you don't feel comfortable having, or just the hard conversations and how we can advocate for our kids a little bit better. You have the book, The First Four
I
Words.
do. Yes.
And can you just tell us a little bit like, oh, I love
It's
it.
right there. It's
Yeah.
always right there.
Yeah. What are your recommendations for parents who might have to have a hard conversation that
Yeah.
they don't want to have?
Well, let's just acknowledge every parent is going to have a hard conversation, either with their co-parent, either with their parents about how to raise their kids, how to advocate for their kids, and the hard conversations that we have with our kids. And it's not unlike anyone we're going to have as part of the human experience. Half of them go easy, half of them don't feel all that comfortable. And if they may or may not be all that hard, but if they're uncomfortable and we start to worry about it enough that we start to talk ourselves out of even trying, why even try? Why have the conversation? And that's the thing that I want to emphasize is the first conversation to have lots of times is with yourself. Am I shying away from this conversation? Why? Am I already prescribing what I think the outcome can only be, only one solution? Or am I already anticipating how the other person's going to react? And I'm using that to justify why I do or don't say something. So I think that's the first pause is to check in and find, am I uncomfortable? Why am I uncomfortable? And is it really true? Because the first and best step beyond that in having an effective next conversation with a person is to be very much neutral in your emotional response. Because as soon as you come in hot, there's immediate deflection, defensiveness, and people are then going to listen to your behavior or your tone and not hear what you're trying to say. So, first step of advocacy is check yourself and then neutralize tone. And then the question becomes, how can I find the win-win? So I wrote the book, The First Four Words, because I have found even with very senior level executives, they were shying away from conversations that were not nearly as personal and nearly as emotionally difficult as the ones that you're having when you're advocating with a child. And having high-risk teens, trust me, spent a lot of time in the counselor's office, the principal's office, the whole thing. So even executives kept coming back to me saying, I didn't have the conversation. And we'd agreed that it would be helpful to have. We agreed, we talked about what it would be, what the outcome would be if they had it. And I said, why didn't you have the conversation? And they would tell me, I didn't know what to say. And I think when you think about a hard conversation around advocating for your child, I know what my emotional response is, and I know what I'm outraged about. I know what I want to try and get out of it, but do I really know what to say? And I find that oftentimes the fear of not knowing what to say or saying it badly or things might getting worse, increasingly, even for my clients, was becoming the reason why the conversations weren't happening. And when conversations that need to happen don't happen, the situation festers. And when it's your child, the stakes get higher and higher. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know that you've been there. Lauren, your face says it all. How do we step into those conversations more confidently earlier before we have that escalation or the defensiveness that might come up from the other side? And I think one of the first things to realize, this goes back to my experience as a trial attorney, each side has their win or the thing that they need to conserve and maintain. And so you think about the school district or teachers, in theory, they're looking for equality. So when you come in asking for an exception, that already challenges how do we ensure that everyone's having equal access? That's one of the things. How do we ensure that we're using our budget effectively? That's another piece. And so just understanding the pressures that the person on the other side might be having and being open and curious to them, looking for ways to not only get your result, but to help them with theirs, or at least present that you're open to that is a good way to do it. So that's process stuff, being curious, looking for ways to acknowledge their challenges and their goals, being collaborative as much as you can, and staying neutral. And then conceptually, that all sounds fine, but what do I say? And lots of ways to start. And so one of the things I'll ask my clients is if you could start that conversation in as few as 4 words, how would you start it? And that really became the genesis of the book because I found when I asked that question, the conversation that they were afraid to have or that they said they didn't know what to say, they could flip into a gamification thing and say, if I could start that in 4 words, let's find the win win. That's an option. What would it take? What could be possible? And so you start to think about what are a few simple phrases that you tuck into your toolbox. And then you start with that. People will say, once I'm started, where does it go from there? And I said, that's the beauty of it. Most of the resistance you have is your own resistance to even having the conversation. And once you get it started in a neutral, productive, collaborative way, you're usually going to be met with the same energy. Will you get the result that you don't want, that you want? Maybe not. And in my experience, not exactly. However, I want a partnership with that person because my first time coming to talk with you probably won't be my last time. So, how can we maintain the relationship even if we disagree over the outcome, at least for right now? I think that's really helpful. And back in the days when I was practicing law, they would say if any one party walks away from a mediation or a conversation, one person doing cartwheels and one person crying, that was a bad result. You want both people to still have some agency and relationship enough to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that is great. I love what you said about collaboration and wanting to walk away, both like getting something out of it. So one person's not like super happy and one person's crying. We did an episode about talking to your coach, like a sports coach of your kid, and that might be a difficult conversation. And just say, we want to collaborate with you. We want to make this a win-win situation. Like, how can we support you? And just really going into that and leaning into that rather than this is what I need. I want you to do this for me. It's like, how can we support each other for the good of my kid?
That's
Like,
right. And the good of my kid and all the kids that you want to help, because I'm assuming you got into this profession because you were really earnest in your desire to help kids.
yeah,
So I'm not asking anything for my kid that I want to prevent you from providing something as meaningful to other kids. But I can't really speak for those kids. I'm speaking for this one. So let's see if we can figure this out.
yeah, when my son, he didn't get officially diagnosed with pathological demand avoidance because they don't diagnose that in the US, but his occupational therapist said, I think he has it. And then I looked at everything and yes, he definitely does. And so I went to the school and I said, he has pathological demand avoidance. And they're like, what is that? They had no idea what it was. And so my hope is that through educating them about what it is, that they might identify other students who could also use the accommodations that my son is getting. And so everybody can just win. They can succeed where they might have seen other kids as quote unquote problem kids. Like they're
Right.
being defiant, they're not doing what they're asked. But now they might have that new understanding of, oh, they're being defiant. So maybe they have pathological demand avoidance. Maybe it's anxiety that's driving them. Maybe there's trauma in their background and now they have anxiety and that's why they're being defiant. It's not that they want to be defiant, it's just that they have no other option.
Absolutely. I resonate very specifically with that. And we had different labels passed around for what we were dealing with our kid. And I think in talking with you and the description that you provided, that's probably more specific, the PDA piece that you're talking about.
Hey everyone, Samantha here, and I'm thrilled to invite you to join me for something special, the Parenting Power Hour. This is your chance, parents of neurodivergent kids, to bring your questions directly to me and fellow parents in the room. We're here to help you develop actionable plans that really work so you can finally stop the meltdowns and find peace in your home. As a mom to 3 kids with ADHD and autism, I've seen and been through the challenges too. So trust me, we'll find solutions together that fit your family. Don't miss out on the Parenting Power Hour. It's a free online monthly gathering every second Thursday of the month from 12:45 to 1:45 Mountain Standard Time. Visit everybrainisdifferent.com to reserve your spot today.
So in the midst of it, one of the things that came up after we had engaged in a variety of things in partnership with the school district to the extent we could, but ultimately seeking other resources. And I went back and talked to the school counselor who had been passionately supportive of my kid, really passionate about our family. We loved her, and yet she was actively playing a role that was so closely aligned to the school district that in ways that she didn't understand, she was actually undermining the partnership. And that's an interesting thing, but I felt like I had a responsibility to show, can I show you how this system is set up to save money and not really be as helpful to the families and the kids that I know you care about? And it was an interesting discussion, no shame, no blame, no vilifying, but here's another way to look at the role that you are being asked to play. And I think it was I the word that comes to mind, I think she was devastated to discover that following the rules, doing the things that she was asked to do, trying to be a good counselor in the system had her actively participating in labels that were inaccurate and assignments to be in certain programs that were completely inappropriate. And until we talked it through, I don't think she had any insight for it. It took a while before I was ready to have that conversation in that neutral, calm way, but it was really meaningful that she could hear it, that she could hear it. And I hope that it was meaningful for her to understand it because I, at that point, and I'm sure you've been in this position, did have some ideas for how she could be more collaborative in this in-between place that she is between the school district and the families that she wants to support.
Yeah, yeah. And I think most people want to support our kids the way that they need to be supported, and they just don't understand how. So if we can say, hey, this works really well at home, maybe let's
Mhm.
try this, or this works really well when he goes to occupational therapy or speech therapy or whatever. Like maybe we can try this at school because school is not going well and these other places are, so let's see what we can do. And I think from my experience, when I've communicated that, teachers are more than willing to do what is going to make their students succeed. They want to
Right.
see their students succeed. They don't want to have behavioral issues. They don't want to see their students fail. They just don't know what they don't know.
And inadvertently, I think it can be really surprising to them to find out that inadvertently doing certain things are actually making the situation worse. And my neighbor has a kindergartner who's coming home every day with a red card or a purple card and just grieving the fact that she's been identified as a bad kid. And I don't even think that's the messaging that the teacher's coming from, but her card's different than other people's, and she knows that's not right. And you say there's got to be a more discreet way to manage that. And is this that's crushing. I just had something come up yesterday, a memory from 5th grade. I am very well on in years, and I was stunned to tap into that experience. I didn't expect it to come up, and the emotions were still really raw. And so I think about this little 5-year-old who's so sweet and struggling, and what is how do we maintain self-esteem in that? That's part of what we're advocating for. And I see that with my son. He's now almost 30. And there is a large portion of his life that I don't think he's even willing to talk about. It was so difficult. And so advocating through the education part of it is one thing, but also providing that emotional support and well-being so that it's not stigmatized, as you said,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
scarring.
Yeah. I was talking to someone today. It's Clarissa. She runs a parent tween connection company. And she was saying maybe parents need to find their kid, not an advocate, but someone that they can talk to that's like the Boys and Girls Club, like a big brother or something like that, not through a nonprofit, just finding someone that they can trust, that they can talk to. So when things happen, they don't have to go to mom or dad or their counselor. They just have a normal person to talk to that's
Yeah,
not like these other labels. And I think
yeah,
that would be very beneficial if they're getting bullied at school and they don't want to talk to their parents or something's happening in their life that they just don't want to talk to their parents about it, then they can have that person to go to. And I just thought that was a really great idea. But obviously, you have to vet the right person for that
yeah,
because that is putting a lot of trust into someone. But if it works out, then that might be
right.
a good option for a kid who's maybe not talking to their parents as much, doesn't feel comfortable talking to their parents. But yeah, so we were just talking about that today, and I just thought
Yeah.
that's an idea that I never thought of before.
Yeah, I like that
Yeah.
idea. It's ironic. My kid who was struggling so much was a playground friend, so he was there for other kids that were getting bullied, but he didn't have his own playground friend,
Yeah.
and I didn't know that was an issue. I think sometimes things aren't getting talked about because they haven't even figured out yet what the issue was. I remember talking to my son when he was in his teens, and I'd come to learn that he was just off the charts high anxiety, but he always seemed pretty calm until all of a sudden it started exploding.
Yeah.
And I said, "Man, I didn't even know." And he said, "Mom, I didn't know other people didn't feel this until it became what it became. I thought this was part of everyone's experience." And some of the words we use, like anxious, nervous, we all have some variation of that. And I think as a child, how do they even articulate the need for that kind of connection? And as a
Yeah.
parent, I wasn't astute enough to pick up on it. And that's a regret, but that's how we learn.
Yeah, definitely. Like parenting is hard. You're never gonna do it the way you want to do it.
No,
And there's things that I look back on that I'm like, oh, I could have done that better. But that's why you learn and that's why
that's why you
you
learn.
grow.
Yep.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you have any resources? I know you have your book. Do you recommend any other resources to help people have those hard conversations, or where can people find your book?
They can find my book on Barnes& and Noble, independent booksellers, and Amazon. And I think I wrote it for people to have a way to get things started. So even though we talked about it being a leadership book, there's a chapter around what four words are never going to work. Like, it's rare to think that over my dead body is ever going to be a good opener. So there's a few things there, but there is a
Yeah.
part around how do you support someone who's going through grief or a setback? And what do you say in a family gathering situation? So there are a broader set of scenarios and situations there. I don't have the child advocate chapter of the book, but I am putting a pin in it for future opportunities.
Awesome. I love that. And our last question for you is what do you do for fun?
What This is not going to sound very fun for most of the people. I learned to knit when I was 5, but I never really got all that good at it. And then there are a few good things that came out of COVID, and I became an expert knitter. And I love sheep, alpacas, yarn, fiber, wooden needles, anything that I can do with my hands to keep my hands busy and to create with color and fiber. It's completely fun. I also like to travel, which is more mainstream, but I thought I'd throw that in there.
No, I love it.
I like the name.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome. Whatever you do that you like to do, that's what we want to hear about. Says.
What do
This
you
is
do
so
for
different.
fun?
I go outside and do things. I like going on adventures. I like going, like tomorrow we're going to Hell's Canyon in Idaho, and I'm
Wow.
stoked.
Yeah,
So I like to go on adventures and go camping and all that stuff.
that sounds
Yeah.
cool. What about you, Lauren?
I'm all about Legos and naps.
I like all of those things. This is great.
Big fan of Legos, big fan of photography. So
Nice.
those are my fun things.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lauren, what were the highlights? What'd you think?
Ooh, so many. I like going back, so we've talked about this a couple times now, that like an accommodation for one, like we talked about the wheelchair ramps, like that helps parents with strollers and elevators. And so it benefits everyone. And I wish more people would get on that bandwagon. It's not taking away from others, it's adding to everyone most of the time.
Yeah.
And then I love it. And I think this is really important for any conversation for anybody, especially if it's going to be a hard conversation or conflicting conversation, is to check yourself and take that pause before you go into it, especially if it is something that you may be like really frustrated with or upset, to have that moment, like she said, to neutralize your emotions. Because I think a lot of times, especially if you're trying to get something, especially in like professional avenues, like you really have to neutralize that. And so I really kind of appreciate that advice.
Yeah.
And then with her, those 4 words, and she mentioned 4 of them that have stuck with me. When we were working together, I went to my very first conference. I forgot what it was called. You may remember. And in one of the
Human Partnerships. No,
yes,
Western Partnerships on Human Services Conference.
yes. In one of the classes, there is a parent, and one of the things that she said, and I have used this multiple times for other reasons, and because I don't have children, is what will it take? What will it take when you're asking, instead of just asking for something, phrasing it differently, and what will it take? Because then it requires that other party to think about it and has to come up with no. It's going to be harder for them to say no or nothing, and then that's going to make them look a little bit. And I think, and so I like that. Let's find the win-win. What will it take? I think are really good words for advocating for your child, especially in the school or whatever it might be. I think those are great starting words. And then again, it brings that into that being open for both parties, being curious for both parties, and then that collaboration, which in the end, hopefully we get that, but that ends up helping the child.
Yeah.
I really love that. And that's just that what will it take has stuck with me for a year.
It's been like 9 years
it's
because
been
we
9
went
years,
there
and
in 2016.
It's
Yeah.
the only class I remember. I remember her talking about her child, and she just started saying, what will it take, and the improvements that happened after she started using that phrase.
Yeah. Because I think people will more likely say, oh, this is what it will take, and not just a straight up nothing. We're not going to do anything for you, because that is a very collaborative statement to say. And if they're not willing to come to the table at all, it's much harder for someone to say, we're not going to do that. If you're asking, what will it take? Like, what do I need to do? Because when I hear that phrase, I just think of, what do I need to do? Well, that was weird. What do I need to do to support you to help support my child? And that's what I infer when someone says, what will it take? Like, you're willing to work if they're willing to work.
Exactly.
But yes, we're very grateful for Tucker for coming on the show today. And we're very grateful for all our listeners. So thank you very much. If there's anything you want to hear about, let us know. And if you have any questions and want to get your questions answered, you can go to our SpeakPipe link where you can leave a message for us and we will answer it on the show. So you can leave like a 90-second voicemail or 2-minute voicemail. Just tell us what your question is. You can remain anonymous and then we will share it on the show. And we hope that you all have a great week. So see you later.
Bye.